The North Korean regime officially has ICBM capabilities. After decades of developing nuclear weapons, the North Korean regime now can launch those nuclear weapons at the United States. While the North Korean capability is still primitive compared to American, Russian, Chinese, or Indian standards, the fact that the North has progressed from possessing nuclear weapons to now having the ability to launch those weapons means that American foreign policy toward North Korea has failed. When foreign policy fails as catastrophically as the policy toward North Korea has, war is usually the result. Hello and welcome to today's after action briefing on North Korea's missile development. I'm Brandon Weichert, founder and CEO of the Weichert Report. Many in the West remain committed to the previous policy of negotiation coupled with sanctions. Unfortunately, as the last 2 decades have proven, this combination has failed to prompt changes in the North Korean regime. The goal of the multi-party talks conducted under the Clinton administration, or the sanctions imposed by the George W. Bush administration, were aimed at getting the North to abandon its pursuit of nuclear arms. From 1994 until 2006, the North did not abandon its pursuit of nukes. In fact, it used the time it took to negotiate with the West as a means of delaying Western reprisals for the North's continued nuclear research and development. In 2006, despite being under heavy sanctions, the North successfully tested nuclear arms. 10 years later, in November of 2016, it was reported that the North Koreans had the capacity to miniaturize the nuclear arsenal it had. This is important because once a state has the means to miniaturize nuclear arms, the only thing it needs is the capacity to launch those miniaturized nukes. Then came the July 4th holiday in 2017. The North surprised the world when it launched a fully functional ICBM from its border with China into the Sea of Japan. While the missile was launched at an incredibly steep angle and essentially crashed into the nearby Sea of Japan, this was done under the control of North Korea's military, before the North's missiles had fallen prematurely from the sky due to mechanical failure. For years, the West failed to understand that each failed North Korean missile test was not actually a failure, but a mere setback in North Korea's long march toward nuclear weapons capacity. You see, even when a missile test fails, the test data collected from that failure contributes to making the next tests successful. Each failure is a lesson learned toward success, rather than a simple failure. This is how the North got nuclear weapons in the first place: trial and error. It is how likely they figured out rudimentary miniaturization techniques as well. It is how they now have a working ICBM. Eventually, within the next few years, they will have a very serious capacity to launch those ICBMs, not just at Alaska, but at any part of the United States. Given these facts, there are still many in the West who insist that the United States should simply negotiate. After all, these folks rationalize, the Kim regime is merely interested in self-preservation. The nuclear capacity is not really about a threat to anyone unless someone decides to try and topple the Kim regime. It's more of a deterrence against the West rather than a first strike weapon. If the North were China or even Russia or India, I'd agree. Unfortunately, the North Korean state ideology implies that it will not merely use its budding nuclear arsenal as a means of exacting greater concessions from the West. At least that won't be the end result. Indeed, it will use the prospect of nuclear war to hold the world hostage and weaken America's position not only on the Korean Peninsula but likely in East Asia. Once America's position is sufficiently weakened and its resolve is also weakened, the North will enact its ultimate goal of conquering the South and reunifying the peninsula under its control. Regime types really do matter. In this case, the North Korean regime is governed by something known as Juche. This is a highly militarized, toxic blend of Marxism, ultranationalism, and an extreme cult of personality surrounding the Kim regime. It is also married to the ancient Korean concept of Sungun, or military first. In order to empower the Kim regime's cult of personality, all resources, people, and funds are channeled into expanding the force and size of the North Korean military, specifically its nuclear program. Without its nuclear program being effective, the Kim regime will lose all legitimacy, which means it will lose control of the country. Also, since North Korea's civilian life has been laid low by the Kim regime's notorious corruption and the international sanctions regime, the Juche ideology is backward-looking. It seeks to restore North Korea to its previous economic and military dominance that it enjoyed from the 1950s and the 60s. It has also combined with a horrible blend of ideological and territorial aggrandizement. Further, Juche is deeply wedded to forcibly reuniting the South with the North. Once it accomplishes this task, the Kim regime desires to take Korea back to its isolationist roots as the Hermit Kingdom, a role that it enjoyed before interacting with the West more than 2 centuries ago. As an addendum, we cannot forget that the North has become a hub of international criminality and terror, as well as a major part of the international human trafficking circuit. More dangerously, the North plays a pivotal role in the unofficial nuclear nexus of illiberal regimes seeking to acquire nuclear arms in order to keep the United States and its allies away. This nuclear nexus, by the way, is protected at various times on the international diplomatic level by both Russia and China. Iran is probably North Korea's greatest partner. Indeed, the two regimes routinely coordinate on nuclear development. It is likely that whatever technology the North develops will end up in Iran's hands and vice versa. Thus, the North Korean regime is more than a mere regional headache. It's truly a global threat that must be stopped at all costs. Should North Korea be allowed to build and retain a nuclear force capable of threatening anywhere in the world, from Seoul to Tokyo to New York, and should the West insist on negotiating with the Kim regime, it will not deter the North from greater aggression against the South or possibly Japan. Instead, it will induce the North Koreans toward greater aggression, since the Kim regime will assume that America is in retreat and the South cannot truly resist the human wave of North Korean soldiers and heavy artillery and nuclear hellfire that the North will unleash upon the South. Furthermore, the Trump administration's understandable aim of trying to get China and even maybe Russia into applying pressure on the North will not work. In both cases, the two parties are not interested in buttressing American goals. For the Chinese, they traditionally favor a sense of stability on the Korean Peninsula, especially because any type of military action will send millions upon millions of North Korean refugees fleeing across the border into China, which will destabilize the perilous Chinese political and economic system right now. A similar fear shared with Russia, who also shares a border with North Korea. Also, the Russians are interested in complicating U.S. foreign policy wherever it can. Make no mistake, the North is preparing to fight and win a war on the Korean Peninsula. The United States should beat them to the punch and take action sooner rather than later so as to prevent a greater human catastrophe and a greater geopolitical disaster from befalling not only the region but the world. In so doing, the American action just might prompt the fence-sitting China to actually move in to topple the Kim regime. After all, while they favor stability now, if the United States moves toward irrevocable military action, the Chinese will have no choice but to intervene. The hope would be that rather than trying to buttress the mad Kim regime, they might actually move to quickly resolve the situation in North Korea by doing a regime change operation themselves, which would thereby negate any further U.S. military action against the North and likely prevent any attempt to reunify the Korean Peninsula under democratic Seoul. America's goal toward that end should not be to impose democracy upon the North or to forcibly reunify the Korean Peninsula under the South's control. Instead, America's mission should be to protect the South, to remove the Kim regime, but more preferably, with military action being initiated by the U.S., it should be to send a signal to the Chinese that we are open to the Chinese replacing the Kim regime and installing a more stable, more prosperous regime there, one that is acceptable to all sides. So if the Chinese have a military strongman they would prefer, so long as it is not a psychotic cult of personality dedicated to nuclear revanchism, America should be fine with that solution. The goal here would be to resolve the conflict as quickly as possible and to preserve the South Koreans' economic and political situation as much as possible. Plus, if there is a pro-Chinese or friendly Chinese regime in the North, it would also likely be friendly to the Russians, and we could even start to talk about potentially removing American presence from the Korean Peninsula, because our goal in Northwest Asia should be stability above all else. The United States has tried negotiations. It has tried sanctions. It has tried to avoid war at all costs. We have done the right thing. We have gone through every other option short of war. Unfortunately, it is apparent that war is upon us. This report is not an ode to war. If anything, this after-action report is a lament about the failures of American foreign policy toward the North. It is also an acknowledgement that it is not in the United States' interest to give in to nuclear blackmail. More importantly, as you've seen, the nature of the North Korean regime means that once it has the ability to threaten the United States itself, the North will not be cowed from achieving its wider goals of regional and international destabilization. If action is not taken now, when the United States still has the initiative, our allies will be defeated and an American city may be lost in a nuclear exchange. In that case, the United States will be forced to take military action, only it will be done from a position of weakness and the initiative will not be in our favor. We will be simply reacting to events. And as we've seen after 9/11, with the wars in Afghanistan and the ridiculous war in Iraq, or Libya even, when America is left to reacting to revanchism and terrorism, the United States fares poorly in that situation. These are the stakes. The United States must strike now, and it must move quickly. For the Weichert Report, I'm Brandon Weichert.